Bible Story Shock, The Life of Noah, the Ark, the Flood, and the Covenant. Welcome to Biblical Journey. Let me guide you to this journey through one of the most profound and awe-inspiring stories in the Bible, the story of Noah, the Flood, and the Covenant. The story of Noah is not just one of survival, it is a tale of righteousness, judgment, and divine promise. It speaks to us across the ages about the consequences of human wickedness, the mercy of God, and the enduring hope for the future. In this video, we will explore Noah's life before the flood, the great deluge that destroyed the world, the ark that saved humanity and the animals, and the covenant that God made with Noah afterward. As we unfold this timeless story, we will reflect on the significance of Noah's righteousness, the meaning of the flood, and the covenant God made with all of creation. So, sit back and relax as we embark on this biblical journey together. Noah's righteousness, the chosen one. Before we journey into the flood itself, it is important to understand the world Noah lived in and why God chose Noah to carry out such a monumental task. The world, as described in the opening chapters of Genesis, was a place of increasing corruption and wickedness, where humanity's actions were spiraling out of control. But amidst this chaos, Noah stood as a beacon of hope, a man of righteousness, in a time when righteousness had nearly disappeared from the earth. In Genesis 6 verse 5, the Bible paints a grim picture of humanity before the flood. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This description reveals the extent of mankind's corruption. The people had turned away from God, indulging in every form of sin and immorality. Violence, hatred, and idolatry filled the earth, and there was no regard for justice or righteousness. The hearts of the people were entirely consumed by evil thoughts and desires, and this led to a world marked by moral decay and spiritual death. But in the midst of this darkness, we encounter Noah, a figure of profound contrast. The Bible tells us that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and that he walked faithfully with God. Genesis 6:9. This statement is significant because it emphasizes that Noah's righteousness was not the result of following external rituals or rules, but a deep, personal relationship with God. Noah's faith in God was genuine, and he lived out his righteousness in his daily actions, even when the world around him had abandoned such principles. But what does it mean to be righteous in the biblical sense? Righteousness in the Bible is not about perfection or flawlessness. Rather, it is about being in right relationship with God, living in obedience to his commands, and seeking justice and mercy for others. It is a heart that desires to honor God above all else, even in the face of immense adversity. Noah's righteousness was not just a matter of keeping the letter of the law, but of aligning his life with God's will. Noah's righteousness stood in stark contrast to the wickedness around him, and this distinction was noticed by God. In Genesis 6, verses 6 and 7, we see God's sorrow at humanity's condition. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." God's grief is palpable here. The Creator, who had originally made humanity in his image, now grieves because of the moral decay and evil that has overtaken his creation. But in the midst of divine regret, there is a glimmer of hope: Noah. Noah's life was a testimony of faithfulness in a world that had turned its back on God. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 8 we are told, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." This favor was not because Noah was without fault, but because of his obedience and trust in God. His faithfulness in the face of a godless society made him the chosen vessel for a mission that would alter the course of human history. God saw Noah's righteousness, and he chose him to carry out his plan for salvation. It is in this moment that God reveals his intentions to Noah, showing him a plan that would save both humanity and the animal kingdom. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 to 14, God speaks to Noah. "I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out." This is a pivotal moment. God reveals that the world's corruption has reached a point of no return. Judgment is coming in the form of a great flood, but Noah is chosen to preserve life. God gives him the specific instructions for building the ark, a massive boat that will shelter Noah, his family, and 2 of every kind of animal. The ark itself would become a symbol of God's grace and salvation. Despite the coming destruction, God's mercy was evident in his provision for Noah and his family. The ark would carry the survivors of God's judgment to safety, just as Christ in the New Testament becomes our ark of salvation. The flood would cleanse the earth of its corruption, but Noah's faithfulness would allow a new beginning. Noah's role was not just to build an ark, he was called to be the vessel of hope. In a world that had turned away from God, Noah's obedience became the means through which God's salvation plan would be fulfilled. In segment 1, we have explored the life of Noah before the flood, examining his righteousness in the face of a corrupt world. His obedience and faithfulness to God's call made him the chosen instrument of God's mercy in a time of judgment. As we reflect on Noah's example, we are reminded of the importance of faith, obedience, and trust in God, even when the world around us seems lost. The flood, humanity's final judgment. As we turn the page from Noah's righteousness to the flood itself, we step into a moment in history that changed the world forever. The flood, one of the most catastrophic events in the Bible, is not just about the destruction of the world, but about God's judgment upon a society consumed by wickedness and his mercy for those who remain faithful to him. The flood is both a warning and a promise, a divine act of purification that cleanses the earth of its corruption. In the previous segment, we learned how God chose Noah to build the ark, a vessel of salvation that would carry Noah, his family, and the animals to safety. Now, we enter the tragic and awe-inspiring event of the flood itself, a moment when God's judgment was poured out upon the earth in a way that left no corner untouched. In Genesis 7, verse 11 and 12, the Bible gives us a vivid description of the beginning of the flood. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. And rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. It is important to understand that this wasn't just a heavy rainstorm. The flood came from 2 sources, the waters from above, the heavens, and the waters from below, the great deep. The heavens opened, and the earth's waters burst forth from the depths, creating a powerful and overwhelming torrent. The floodwaters were vast and relentless, covering the earth and submerging it in an act of divine judgment. God had warned Noah for years, but now the time had come for the world to face its reckoning. The flood wasn't just an act of punishment, it was also a cleansing. The earth had been corrupted by sin, and God's judgment was necessary to restore order. Genesis 7:17 says, "For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. As the flood waters rose, everything was submerged, everything except for those who were safely inside the ark." Genesis 7:21-23 states, "Every living thing that moved on the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, people and animals alike. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. This was a cataclysmic event. No one except Noah and his family survived. The earth, which had once teemed with life, now lay silent, blanketed under a thick layer of water. The floodwaters were not only a means of judgment, they were also a means of restarting creation. In this way, the flood marks the end of an era and the beginning of a new world. Though the flood was a moment of destruction, it also marked a pivotal point in God's redemptive plan. Even in the midst of judgment, God's mercy is evident. He spared Noah and his family, not because of their perfection, but because of their obedience and faithfulness, as Genesis chapter 7:1 recounts. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation." The ark, as we will explore in the next segment, symbolizes salvation amidst judgment, a place of refuge where God's mercy is experienced even as his judgment falls upon the world. The flood itself lasted for 40 days and nights, but the waters remained upon the earth for much longer. Genesis chapter 7, verse 24 tells us, "The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. For this period, the world was covered in darkness and silence, but Noah and his family were safe inside the ark, waiting for the waters to recede. It was a time of reflection, waiting, and trusting in God's promises. While the world outside was being wiped clean, Noah and his family found refuge in the grace of God. As the floodwaters finally began to recede, Noah's faith remained steadfast. He was not only obedient in building the ark, but he also trusted in God's timing, knowing that the earth would not remain flooded forever. As we reach the end of this segment, we are reminded that judgment is never the final word. Even in the darkest moments of destruction, there is hope. And in the case of the flood, that hope came in the form of salvation for Noah and his family. This concludes segment 2, the flood, humanity's final judgment. We have witnessed the power of God's judgment and his mercy, which spared Noah and his family. The flood symbolizes not only divine justice, but also the restoration of creation. While the waters of judgment came to cleanse the earth, they also brought with them the promise of a new beginning. The ark, a symbol of salvation. As the flood waters recede and the earth is cleansed, we now turn our attention to the ark, the vessel that served as both salvation and sanctuary for Noah, his family, and the animals. The ark, more than just a boat, became a symbol of God's mercy and the means of deliverance in the midst of a world under judgment. Its construction, its purpose, and its significance offer profound lessons about faith, obedience, and the grace that saves. In the previous segment, we saw the destruction of all life on earth, except for those who were safely inside the ark. The ark itself stands as a physical manifestation of God's provision. In Genesis 6:14, God's command to Noah was clear. "Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out." God provides Noah with specific instructions, a detailed blueprint for the ark's construction. This wasn't a simple task. It was a monumental undertaking, both a test of Noah's faith and a symbol of salvation for all of humanity. The ark, with its massive dimensions, is described in Genesis 6:15. "This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high." This size is staggering, equivalent to about 1.5 football fields long. The ark was vast, built to hold not only Noah's family, but also pairs of every kind of animal. Every species that walked the earth, flew in the air, or swam in the waters. The ark was God's plan to preserve life and ensure the survival of his creation. While Noah was busy building the ark, he also had to gather the animals, 2 of every kind. This was no easy task, but it was part of God's plan. Genesis 7:2-3 provides more insight into this divine instruction. "Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird of the air, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth." As each pair of animals arrives at the ark, Noah places them in their designated rooms. This imagery speaks to the divine order of God's creation. Even in the midst of judgment, God was preserving life. Every creature, every species, was given a chance for renewal through the ark. The ark wasn't just a means of salvation for humanity, it was a preservation of the world's biodiversity in a time of overwhelming destruction. As Noah, his family, and the animals settled into the ark, the rains began to pour. In Genesis chapter 7:11-13, we are told, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, On the 17th day of the second month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. The ark was not simply a physical structure, but a symbol of hope and deliverance. Its construction represents obedience to God's command, but it also shows the faith that Noah had in God's promise. In a world full of sin and rebellion, Noah's obedience stood as a testimony to God's faithfulness. The ark is a refuge, much like Christ, who serves as a refuge for all who trust in him. In many ways, the ark becomes a symbol of salvation for us today. Just as the ark carried Noah and his family through the flood, Christ offers salvation to those who trust in him. The ark, which carried life through judgment, points to Jesus Christ, who offers us eternal life through his sacrifice on the cross. In the same way Noah and his family entered the ark for safety, we are invited to enter into Christ's salvation, which will preserve us through life's storms and the ultimate judgment of sin. As the floodwaters continued to rise, Noah and his family remained secure in the ark, protected from the chaos outside. This image serves as a reminder that God's protection is not just a promise for a time long ago, but a promise that extends into our lives today. The ark, a vessel of salvation, carried Noah and his family through the storm and offered hope to all of creation. It was built with divine purpose and obedience, and through it, God preserved the world. The ark symbolizes God's mercy in the midst of judgment, a message that echoes throughout the Bible. In segment 3, we have seen how the ark served as a means of deliverance, not just for Noah, but for all the creatures of the earth. Its construction, its purpose, and its place in the story are a testament to God's faithful provision. The covenant, a promise for the future. After the devastation of the flood, as the ark finally rests on dry ground and the waters begin to recede, we reach a pivotal moment in the story of Noah, a moment of divine promise and hope. As the floodwaters gradually subside, God speaks to Noah and his family, reaffirming his commitment to humanity and creation through the Rainbow Covenant. This covenant becomes the centerpiece of the story, representing God's enduring mercy and his unshakable promise to never again destroy the earth with a flood. Let us explore this covenant and its profound significance in both the biblical narrative and in our understanding of God's relationship with his creation. In Genesis 8, verse 20-22, after Noah and his family have disembarked from the ark, we see an important act of worship. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures, as I have done." Noah's first act after leaving the ark is to offer a sacrifice to God, a gesture of gratitude and recognition of God's mercy. The sacrifice of clean animals is significant, symbolizing the atonement for sin and the restoration of the relationship between humanity and God. God's response to Noah's sacrifice is a declaration of mercy. Never again will the earth be destroyed in such a way. The promise God makes here is one of mercy despite humanity's sinful nature. In Genesis 8:21, God acknowledges that the inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, yet he promises not to destroy the earth again. This act of mercy demonstrates God's long-suffering nature and his desire for restoration, not destruction. God then establishes his covenant with Noah and all living creatures. In Genesis 9:8-11, God says, "Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. This is the first explicit covenant God makes with humanity, and it is a promise not just for Noah, but for all generations to come. It is a covenant that extends beyond humanity to all of creation, encompassing every living creature that survived the flood. God's promise is clear. The earth will never again be destroyed by water, and life will continue to flourish under his protection. But how does this covenant come to be sealed? In Genesis 9:12-13, God gives Noah a visible sign of the promise. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth." The rainbow is the sign of this covenant, a symbol of God's faithfulness and mercy. Every time we see a rainbow in the sky, we are reminded of God's promise to never again destroy the earth by flood. The rainbow is a reminder of God's grace in the midst of judgment and a token of hope for the future. The rainbow not only serves as a sign of hope, but also as a reminder of God's enduring faithfulness. It tells us that despite the brokenness of the world, God is always at work in his creation, redeeming and restoring what was lost. The covenant is a universal promise, not just for Noah, but for all of humanity and the entire world. It is a promise that God will never leave nor forsake us. Even when the world around us seems bleak, his covenant stands firm. The significance of the rainbow covenant also carries a deeper spiritual meaning. In the context of Noah's story, the flood and the destruction it brought were acts of divine judgment. However, the covenant sealed by the rainbow signifies God's mercy triumphing over judgment. It is a beautiful picture of grace overcoming sin, a promise that God will always provide a way forward, even in the midst of consequences. Just as Noah and his family found refuge and salvation in the ark, we too find salvation and refuge in the promises of God, and ultimately, in the salvation offered through Jesus Christ. The rainbow points to Christ, who through his death and resurrection offers us eternal security, just as the ark carried Noah to safety amidst the flood. As we conclude segment 4, we reflect on the rainbow covenant as a sign of hope and promise for the future. God, in his mercy, made a covenant with Noah that would last for generations, offering not just a physical sign in the form of the rainbow, but a spiritual assurance of his faithfulness. The rainbow reminds us that God's mercy is always present, even in the most challenging of times. Through this covenant, God showed that while judgment is a part of his justice, mercy will always prevail. As we look to the future, the rainbow stands as a lasting symbol of the hope that we can hold on to, a hope that transcends time and speaks to the hearts of all believers. This concludes our exploration of the rainbow covenant and God's promises following the flood. We have journeyed through the story of Noah, witnessing his righteousness, the flood's devastation, the salvation offered in the ark, and the covenant that remains a powerful symbol of God's faithfulness. The story of Noah offers profound lessons that transcend time, providing insights into faith, obedience, and God's grace. Here are key takeaways from Noah's story. Faith in God's call, even when unseen. Noah's story begins with him being chosen by God, a man who remained faithful in a world filled with sin and corruption. God's command to build the ark came at a time when there had never been a flood, and Noah had no prior reference to what a deluge of such magnitude would look like. Despite this, Noah obeyed without hesitation. Lesson. From Noah we learn the importance of trusting God's commands, even when the path ahead is unclear or seems impossible. True faith involves obedience even when we cannot see the full picture, and we are called to trust God's plan, even in the face of doubt or ridicule. Bible verse was student. Noah had all too interesting standing the reels of people century room tiles. Genesis 6:22. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Righteousness in a corrupt world. Noah's righteousness is a key reason why he was chosen to survive the flood. The world at the time was filled with violence and evil, but Noah stood out as a man who remained blameless and faithful to God. This was not a righteousness born from human perfection, but from his unwavering obedience to God. Noah's story encourages us to live with integrity and righteousness in a world that may be hostile or indifferent to faith. It teaches us that living according to God's word in the midst of sin is an act of faithfulness that honors God. Bible verse was 2:9-9. Noah was a righteousness in protection. Genesis 6:9. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Obedience requires action. When God gave Noah the instructions for building the ark, it wasn't just a matter of faith, it was a matter of action. The ark wasn't just a concept, it had to be built. Noah didn't simply pray for salvation, he worked tirelessly, following God's exact specifications for constructing the ark. Obedience to God requires action, and Noah's obedience meant building the ark, gathering the animals, and preparing his family. This teaches us that obedience to God isn't passive. When we receive a calling or directive from God, we are called to take practical steps to fulfill His will. It is a faith that works, a faith that does not just believe, but actively participates in God's plan. Bible verse, James 2:26. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. God's mercy in the face of judgment. While the flood was a judgment on sin, it was also an act of God's mercy. Noah's family and the animals were saved as a testament to God's desire to preserve life, even in the midst of destruction. The ark itself was a symbol of salvation and a reminder that while God's judgment on sin is certain, God's grace is also abundant. Lesson: from Noah's story, we learn that even in times of judgment and disaster, God's mercy is present. God does not delight in judgment, but seeks to save and redeem. We also see that salvation is available to those who remain faithful, and God's grace is always extended to those who walk in His ways. Bible verse, Genesis 7:1. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation." The importance of family and legacy. Noah's faith wasn't only for his own benefit. It saved his family and the animals, ensuring that life could continue after the flood. The ark became a place of refuge, not only for Noah, but for his entire household. This demonstrates the profound impact of one person's faith. Noah's faithfulness led to the salvation of his family, and through him, a legacy of faith continued for generations. Lesson: Noah's story reminds us that our faithfulness can have a lasting impact on our families and future generations. It underscores the importance of living in such a way that we not only preserve our own relationship with God, but also bring others along on that journey. Bible verse, Genesis 7:7. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. God's promises are always fulfilled. At the end of the flood, God made a covenant with Noah and all living creatures, promising that He would never again destroy the earth with a flood. The rainbow became the sign of this covenant, symbolizing God's faithfulness to His promises. Noah's story shows that God is true to His word, and what He promises will come to pass. We learn that God keeps His promises. The covenant with Noah reassures us that God is faithful and will never break His word. We can trust in His promises for the future, knowing that His faithfulness spans all generations. Bible verse, Genesis 9:13-15. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Hope in the midst of judgment. Despite the overwhelming judgment of the flood, Noah's story ultimately carries a message of hope. The ark was a symbol of salvation amidst destruction, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, God provides a way out for those who trust in Him. The rainbow that follows the flood marks a new beginning, a promise that God will never again destroy the earth in such a way. Noah's story reminds us that even in judgment, there is hope. In life, we may face moments of difficulty or hardship, but like Noah, we can find refuge in God's promises. The rainbow reminds us that God always provides hope, even in the darkest times. Bible verse. Genesis 9:16. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. The story of Noah is rich with lessons for us today. From his faith and obedience to the mercy of God in the face of judgment, Noah's life offers a blueprint for how we are called to live in a world that often chooses the path of sin and rebellion. We are reminded of the importance of walking with God, of the power of a righteous life, and of God's faithfulness to his promises. The story of Noah invites us to trust in God's plan, to be faithful in our walk, and to embrace the hope that God's promises bring. May we, like Noah, remain steadfast in our faith and walk faithfully with God, knowing that his promises, like the rainbow, are sure and everlasting. Thank you for joining Biblical Wonders on this biblical journey. As we reflect on Noah's story, let us remember the enduring promises of God, who continues to offer mercy, restoration, and hope for all generations. May the rainbow remind us of God's steadfast love and his promise to never leave us, even in times of judgment and hardship.